Hi everyone, my name is Leah Kopke and I'm a 3D motion design freelancer. I also have a podcast where each week I cover another 3D modeling tool for Cinema 4D. Hello and welcome. Today we're going to go over the Sculpting Tag, the subdivision specifically designed for sculpting, and the sculpting layers within Cinema 4D. This is really useful for giving you extra flexibility while you're 3D modeling with the sculpting tools. So let's go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D and get started. Here we are inside of Cinema 4D. If you aren't already in the sculpting mode and you are in standard mode right now, all you need to do is click on the sculpting mode up here and it'll switch over and you'll be able to see your sculpting tools here on the left. You'll be able to see your sculpting layers listed here. And if you click on this tab, you'll see your objects. What we're going to do is add in a sphere primitive so that we have something to work with here. I'm going to change this to be a hexahedron, and I'll change our number of segments to 16 so that it's nice and low poly. In order to use the sculpting tools, which you'll see are all grayed out right now, we need to make the sphere editable. So you can do that with the C hotkey or by clicking this button down here. So we'll go ahead and do that. Now nothing is grayed out anymore, which is great. In order to create a duplicate of this sphere, I'm going to hold Control, click on this arrow here, and drag my mouse over. Now we have two spheres. Sphere and Sphere 1, I'm going to name our first sphere Smooth, and our second sphere No Smooth. And you'll see why in a moment. You'll notice that we have this option here, Subdivide. This is the Subdivide for sculpting. We've already covered the Subdivide for regular mesh modeling, and that's here. I'll leave a link to that episode below in case if you're looking for something like that. If you're interested in learning about the subdivision surface, I have another episode where I go in depth for all the settings for that, and you can check that out. I'll leave it in the description below. But right now we're going to be talking about the Subdivide. What you'll notice first of all is that we have Fong tags. You can learn more about Fong. I'll leave that in the description below as well. But the simplified version of the Fong tag is it smooths out your mesh so that it looks round like a sphere. If I take this down, you'll see the individual facets of the polygons a whole lot more. I'll put this back to its default of 40. The reason why I want you to notice this Fong here, this tag, is because the sculpting tag is going to override that. The sculpting tag can't be added by right-clicking and selecting it from here. It is not listed. The only way you can add it is with the Subdivide. So let's talk about the options for the Subdivide. As you may be familiar, if you see an icon that comes with a gear next to it, that's because this tool comes with additional settings. So let's click on the gear to see what those settings are. The setting we have here is smoothness. Now you can adjust how much this is smoothed out as it's subdivided, and I'll show you what that means. I'm going to increase the smoothness to 100%. And I'll click OK. As soon as I do that, you'll see that the Fong tag is grayed out, and instead we have a sculpting tag. If you click Show Layer Manager, it'll show our base object of our sphere in here that we can sculpt on, and you'll see it's adding on Fong here instead of in the Fong tag. You can check this on and off. This is the default Fong that is best for highly dense meshes, which are more typical of sculpting. This is the Fong you want to have for sculpting. You'll notice that we have levels here. If I subdivide this again, you'll see the quads become subdivided and our level increase to 1 from 0. If I subdivide again, it'll increase to 2 and subdivide there. So you'll see what this is doing. It's adding additional levels here to our base mesh. We can slide this back and forth to go back to our base. Now why you'd want to use this is it's easier to add in large details or make large changes when your mesh is less dense. When your mesh is more dense, it's easier to add in small details like adding in the nose of a character or the eyes rather than making large adjustments to the shape of the torso or something like that. So depending on what you're 3D modeling, you might want to be on a different level. Now the cool thing about this is that changes you make at level 0, I'll grab the grab brush, changes that you make at level 0, you'll see update on all the other levels. So I'm just going to grab this surface here and move it. If I increase the levels, you'll see that change taking effect at level 3. If I were to grab the draw tool here, increase the strength, and create a cursive L on here because my name is Leah, and this is a tutorial I'm working on. So now there's a cursive L on there. If I were to reduce our levels down, you'll see that L still taking effect on the other levels here. You won't see it as much at level 0 just because there's not enough geometry to show it, but you'll for sure see it on level 2 even though we added it on level 3. Now the cool thing about this is that you can add layers to add or remove effects here. So you can add a layer up here, and whichever level you are on when you add this layer is the only level you can adjust this layer on. So this layer says it's on level 3, and we are on level 3, so that's why we can change it. I can draw a line here, and I can turn on and off this layer, so I can choose to have this layer affected or not. Sometimes when it gets stuck like this, if you hit the decrease, which decreases your level, and then the increase that increases your level, it shows up again. It just needs to be refreshed a bit. So you'll see that show up again. You can also lock a layer if you don't want to adjust it. Like let's say I'm happy with this line that I drew. I don't want any changes happening to it by accident. I can lock it, and then I can no longer add any more details on there. I accidentally clicked on the base object, but when you have the layer 1 selected and you have it locked, you cannot adjust that layer 1 anymore. You can turn on and off the mask here. We'll go over masks in the future. It's a way to only affect one part of your mesh while you're using the brushes. You can see the strength here. We can reduce the strength and increase the strength. And you'll see that that line disappears when the strength is at 0 and reappears when it's at 100%. So you have a lot of control. You can remove details, add them, put them on different layers, and it's a lot like Photoshop, but for 3D modeling. You can even add in a folder. So let's add in a folder, and you can put your layers in there. So we can organize this nice and neat in here. You can rename any objects. This can be called line if you want, and name your folders. You have options here. If you add in a layer on a lower level, so I decreased this, you can do that, but then you can only adjust this layer on that level. So this is level 1, so I can adjust it on level 1, but I cannot adjust this on level 3. So if I increase this, I cannot adjust level 2 anymore. That's the basics of how that works. We're on level 1. If we don't want to see our changes on level 2 and level 3 of this mesh, we can check this off and we won't see those top layers having an effect anymore. You can see that our mesh had adjusted to that. If we take this back to 0, you can see that only the changes we made on level 0 are able to be seen on our mesh. That's what this does. So what happens in the case where we click on this and instead of having our smoothness set to 100%, what if we have our smoothness set to 0? Now the interesting thing about the smoothness setting is that you can only change it the first time you hit the subdivide. After you hit the subdivide, you can no longer adjust this. You can't change your mind about how smooth you wanted it to be. So you need to set this right the first time. I'll hit OK, and I'll subdivide, subdivide, subdivide. So now you can see at this point that in our layer manager we have 3 levels. This does not look as smooth as we've subdivided it. You can see the facets here, but you can't see that on this sphere. And that's what the smoothness setting does. Now in cases where you're 3D modeling a robot and you want those hard flat edges, it may make sense to subdivide it this way. In the case where you're doing something more organic, like a character or something like that has muscles and fingers and is organic, or a tree or something like that, you may want to use something that has the smoothness turned up. That's something that's really important to keep in mind as you're subdividing and changing these meshes. Let's go through more of the settings for these tags. I'll click on our sculpting tag here. You can adjust the color of your mask, and here I could make it green if I wanted to. I don't have a mask in here right now, so it's not going to be visible. We'll go through masks a little bit more in the future. They control what part of your mesh you are able to use the brushes on. You can mask off certain areas so that they aren't being affected. You could think of it like when you mask things while painting a room, it's so that the paint doesn't go where it's not supposed to. Similar idea here. We know what show layer manager means. Freezing, what that'll do, if I turn on freeze, the layers will no longer be able to be adjusted in here. I won't be able to use the brushes on this anymore. And this is for when you finished up a model, but all those layers are slowing down your computer. This will save your computer memory. You can freeze your model where it's at, and when you're ready to work on it again, you can turn off the freeze and continue working as normal. Something to keep in mind is that deformers do not typically work on objects that have this freeze turned on, but there is an exception for that, or a workaround rather. So I'll add in a bend to our sphere over here. I'll click fit to parent. This is a deformer, by the way. And if I adjust the strength, it's not having any effect on our sphere because we have the freeze turned on in here. But if we turn on allow deformations and then we adjust this, you'll see that our sphere is bending back and forth. So that's how that works there. Those are all the settings for the sculpting tag, for the sculpting layers, and for the subdivide. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to learn more 3D modeling tools, please hit like and subscribe so you'll be notified when the next episode comes out. Thank you so much for 3D modeling with me here on Ambient 3D Animations. I hope to see you here next time. Happy 3D modeling!